My name is Brooke Turner, and the story of how I lost everything began the morning after my husband Caleb died. He was just 38, healthy, full of life, until a sudden heart attack stole him from me in a blink. I stood on the front steps of the craftsman-style home we'd built together in suburban Denver, clutching an overnight bag and a bundle of dying carnations from the hospital. My eyes were swollen from crying, and my fingers trembled as I slid my key into the lock. It didn't turn. At first, I thought I'd grabbed the wrong key in my daze. I fumbled through my bag, pulled out the spare. Nothing. I tried again, jiggling, twisting, praying the door would open, but it was like the house no longer recognized me. And then I noticed something through the side window. Cardboard boxes stacked near the fireplace. A suitcase. A fluffy beige throw blanket I'd never seen before, tossed over our couch. That's when I saw her. Margaret, Caleb's mother, walked through the hallway with a glass of wine in one hand and a smug expression on her face. Behind her, Caleb's sister, Allison, was unloading dishes into my kitchen cabinets like they belonged there. My kitchen. My cabinets. I knocked. Hard. Margaret opened the door slowly, like she'd been expecting me, but hoped I wouldn't show. "Oh, Brooke," she said, feigning surprise. "Didn't think you'd be back so soon. What's going on?" I stammered. "Why doesn't my key work? Why are you here?" She leaned against the doorframe, blocking my view inside. "You're not living here anymore," she said, her voice casual, almost rehearsed. "Caleb bought this house, and now that he's gone, it returns to his family." I blinked, certain I'd misheard. "I'm his wife," I said firmly. "We bought this house together." Margaret let out a small laugh, patronizing and cold. "Oh, please, you'd have a job when you married him. No kids, no prenup. You brought nothing to the table. Caleb paid for everything, and now it's ours again." My breath caught in my throat. "You can't be serious." "Oh, I am," she replied, as Allison appeared behind her holding one of my wedding china plates. "You left the side door unlocked at the hospital," Allison added with a smirk. "We figured you'd be too emotional to notice, so we moved in." My chest tightened, and something inside me cracked. Not just grief, but fury. "You broke into my home," I said through gritted teeth. Margaret shrugged. "It's not yours anymore, sweetheart." I let out a laugh, sharp, bitter, half disbelieving. "You think you're so clever, but you forgot one thing." Margaret raised a brow. "And what's that?" I stepped forward, leveling my voice. 2 years ago, when Caleb's business nearly collapsed because of your terrible investment advice, by the way, I refinanced this house in my name. My credit. My paycheck. Every mortgage payment came from me after that. I've got the bank statements to prove it." Margaret's smug smile faded. "That's not possible." "Oh, it's very possible, and very legal." I held her gaze. "And you just admitted to trespassing." Allison looked between us, suddenly pale. "She's bluffing." "Am I?" I pulled out my phone. "Should we find out what the police think?" That was enough. Margaret grabbed her purse and snapped at Allison to start packing. As they stormed out, Margaret hissed, "You may have won the house, but this isn't over." I didn't flinch. "Try me." When they were gone, I stood there on the porch, still locked out, shaking with adrenaline. My home, my husband, my life, under siege. But as I watched them drive away, I realized something. I wasn't just grieving anymore. I was preparing for war. That night, I didn't sleep. Even with the locksmith scheduled for the next morning, even knowing they were gone for now, my mind wouldn't rest. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Caleb's face, and then Margaret's, mocking me. She'd tried to erase me from his life like I was some footnote. At sunrise, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of untouched coffee. Caleb's favorite cinnamon jar still sat by the stove, unopened since he passed. The ache in my chest was heavy, but so was the anger building beneath it. I wasn't going to let her win. I called the funeral home. "Hi, this is Brooke Turner. I need to revise the guest list for my husband's memorial." A pause. "Of course, Mrs. Turner. What changes?" "Remove Margaret and Allison Grant." Another pause. "Understood." I hung up before I could question myself. Later that day, I ventured into Caleb's office, our shared space filled with boxes of receipts, medical files, and investment records. I hadn't stepped in since the hospital. Everything still smelled like him, woodsy cologne and printer ink. I sifted through documents, trying to find anything that might explain why Margaret was so confident. That's when I found it. A manila folder labeled in Caleb's handwriting. "Postnup, keep safe." My heart stopped. Inside was a notarized postnuptial agreement dated 1 year into our marriage. In black and white, it stated, "In the event of my death, all jointly owned assets, including property, shall be transferred fully to my spouse, Brooke Turner, unless otherwise stated in a last will and testament." And tucked behind it, a note, "If Mom ever tries to pull something, show her this. You know how she gets. Love, C." Tears welled in my eyes, but not from sadness, from strength. Because Caleb knew. And he'd protected me the only way he could. They thought I had no power, no claim, no voice. But they were wrong. And Margaret? She was about to learn exactly who she'd messed with. The next morning, the locksmith arrived right on time. I watched from the porch as he replaced the locks Margaret had so smugly changed, without a second thought. I didn't speak much, just handed him the keys when he was done, and thanked him with a tight nod. He left, and for the first time since Caleb's death, the house was mine again, secured, locked, and safe. Or so I thought. I spent the rest of the day in silence. The house echoed with absence, Caleb's absence. The absence of voices, laughter, normalcy. I walked from room to room, touching picture frames, running my fingers along the grooves of the old banister he had refinished one summer. Everything still smelled like him, looked like him, felt like him. And yet, everything had changed. At 2:13 p.m. the doorbell rang. I froze. Peeking through the front window, I wasn't surprised to see Margaret standing there again, wearing all black like she was headed to a funeral she wasn't invited to. Beside her was a man in a gray suit, mid-40s, briefcase in hand. She was already pulling legal muscle. I opened the door but didn't unlock the screen. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice steady. Margaret gave a tight-lipped smile. "This is Mr. Darnell, my attorney. We're here to discuss the next steps regarding the estate." I tilted my head. "Estate?" "Caleb's estate," she replied, her tone clipped and formal. "Since he didn't leave a will, probate law gives his next of kin certain rights. As his mother, I'm legally entitled to claim a portion of what he left behind, including this property." I raised an eyebrow. "You mean the house in my name? The one refinanced with my income? The one protected by a postnuptial agreement your son voluntarily signed?" Her lawyer cleared his throat. "We'd like to see that documentation, if you don't mind." "I do mind," I said. "You can get it through legal channels like everyone else." Margaret's smile cracked. "I'm being very civil, Brooke," she said, "but if you force this into court, it will get ugly." I leaned a little closer to the screen door. "You changed the locks on me the day after your son died. I'd say we're already past ugly." She bristled, but said nothing. "This house is mine," I added. "And you, both of you, are trespassing." Mr. Darnell tried again. "Perhaps we could sit down?" "No, thank you," I interrupted. "I'll see you in court." Then I shut the door, locked it, and walked away without looking back. That night, I couldn't sleep again. Not out of fear, but out of fury. I sat in Caleb's office, staring at the postnup and the notarized deed like they were shields in a battle I hadn't chosen but refused to lose. Margaret wasn't grieving. She was hunting. And I was the prize. But she'd underestimated me. The next day, I called Angela, a probate attorney I had met through a colleague years ago. She was sharp, meticulous, and completely unshakable. Exactly what I needed. "I need help," I told her after explaining everything. Angela didn't even hesitate. "Send me copies of the deed, the postnup, and any communication she sent you. We'll file a response before they even know what hit them." "Do you think they have a case?" I asked. "They have smoke, not fire," she replied. "But smoke can confuse people, and that's their game. Confuse, intimidate, and wear you down. We're not going to let that happen." I felt something I hadn't in days. Relief. Until the letter arrived. It was slipped under the door late that evening. No postage, no return address. Just a single sheet of paper typed in a serif font. "This house belongs to the Walker family. You are not one of us. Leave before we make it worse." I read it twice. No signature. No direct threat. Just enough to rattle me. But instead of fear, it sparked something else. I snapped a photo, emailed it to Angela, then folded it and tossed it into the trash. Let them play dirty. I wasn't going anywhere. 2 days later, Angela filed the official probate defense paperwork. It included the postnup agreement, the mortgage documents, and even a letter from Caleb's financial advisor affirming that I had been managing the mortgage payments solo for the last 2 years. It was ironclad. Or so we thought. Because Margaret wasn't done. She sent a petition to the court, claiming that Caleb had been suffering from mental distress and cognitive decline, and that he was manipulated into signing the postnup. The claim was absurd, but if the court agreed to hear it, it could delay everything. She's not suing for the house, Angela explained. She's trying to get the postnup thrown out. If that happens, we're stuck in a long probate process. Months, maybe a year. Can she win? I asked. Not if we can prove Caleb was of sound mind. We'll need medical records, witnesses, anything that confirms his mental state when he signed the document. I swallowed hard. He did see a neurologist once, just a few months before he passed. I wasn't allowed to go. He said it was just stress. Angela's voice sharpened. Find those records, fast. That night, I tore through drawers, files, anything that might hold the answer. Finally, in a stack of unopened mail, I found it, a letter from St. Luke's Neurology Center. Following Mr. Caleb Turner's recent evaluation, no cognitive decline or neurological impairment was detected. Patient demonstrates full mental capacity and comprehension. I stared at the page like it was a golden ticket. It was dated just weeks before he signed the postnup. Proof. My hands shook as I emailed it to Angela. Now, I whispered to no one, let's see what Margaret tries next. Because the fight wasn't over, but I was finally ready for it. The morning of the court hearing arrived cloaked in a chilly fog. I stood outside the courthouse in my black coat, clutching a manila folder filled with every document Angela had told me to bring. Copies of the postnup, the mortgage paperwork, and most importantly, Caleb's clean neurology report. This wasn't just a legal battle anymore. It was personal. Margaret hadn't just tried to take my home. She'd tried to erase me from Caleb's life entirely, like I was a placeholder, a footnote, instead of the woman he'd chosen to build a life with. Angela met me at the courthouse steps, her heels clicking confidently against the stone. Ready? She asked, offering me a reassuring smile. I nodded. I was born ready. I just didn't know it until now. Inside, the courtroom was quiet, almost too quiet, the kind of stillness that presses down on your lungs. Margaret sat at the opposite table, dressed like she was auditioning for a tragic opera. All black. Lace veil, a tissue she didn't use. Her attorney, Mr. Darnell, flipped through a binder dramatically, like he was on a television show. Stephanie sat behind them, not saying a word, her gaze fixed somewhere over my shoulder. I didn't care. She'd chosen her side. The judge, a sharp-eyed woman with a no-nonsense tone, called the hearing to order. Angela stood, calm and clear. Your Honor, the petitioner alleges undue influence and questions the mental capacity of Caleb Turner prior to signing a legally binding postnuptial agreement. We are here to present evidence that proves otherwise. Margaret's attorney jumped in, full of pomp. We believe Mr. Turner was not in full command of his faculties when the document was signed. His behavior in the months before his passing raised concerns among family and friends. Angela raised a single eyebrow. Do you have any documented evidence to support that claim? Darnell hesitated. We're still gathering materials. Angela stepped forward and handed a document to the judge. We're already ahead. This is an official letter from St. Luke's Neurology Center, confirming that Mr. Turner was assessed just weeks before the agreement and found to have no signs of cognitive decline. The judge read it silently, lips pursed. Then, Angela handed over the mortgage payment records. Additionally, here are bank statements showing consistent mortgage payments from Brooke Turner's account for the past 2 years. This house is not part of Caleb Turner's estate. It is solely in my client's name. Darnell tried to object, but the judge raised a hand. Mr. Darnell, unless you have proof to counter these documents, your case is standing on wishful thinking. I kept my face neutral, but inside, I felt something rise. Justice. Margaret finally spoke up. Her voice quivered with practiced sorrow. Your Honor, I'm just a mother who lost her only son. I want to make sure his wishes are respected. Angela didn't miss a beat. And yet, Mrs. Blake never contested the mortgage transfer until after Mr. Turner's death. Her actions, changing the locks, moving in without consent, speak louder than words. The judge sighed. This isn't a matter of grief. This is property law. And the documents are clear. Bang. Petition denied. The house remains the legal property of Mrs. Brooke Turner. For a moment there was silence, and then the relief hit me like a crashing wave. I'd won. Margaret stood, rage simmering just beneath her eyes. You may have the house, she hissed under her breath as I passed her. "But don't think this is over." I didn't even look at her. "I know it's not. That's what restraining orders are for." Angela chuckled as we walked outside. "I wish I could bottle that confidence," she said. "You're like a storm in heels." "I've had enough of people mistaking my silence for weakness," I replied. And just like that, we walked back into the world. I was still a widow, still broken in ways I couldn't describe. But I wasn't powerless. Not anymore. Later that afternoon, I went home, sat on the back porch with a glass of red wine, and looked out at the overgrown garden Caleb had once dreamed of building. For years, we'd talked about planting wildflowers, maybe a small herb patch. We never got around to it. Now I had time, and a reason. The next day, I went to the hardware store and bought gloves, seed packets, and soil. I was going to make something grow from all this wreckage. The house was quiet, but mine. I cleaned out the guest room, the linen closet, and finally Caleb's office. Each drawer held memories I wasn't ready to face, but I did it anyway. A man's life, condensed into folders, receipts, and photos. I found one of his journals in the back of the desk drawer. I almost put it away. Almost. But I opened it. Inside was a letter addressed to me. "Brooke, if you're reading this, I guess I didn't make it. And I hate that. I hate the idea of leaving you alone in this house full of memories. But I also know you're strong enough to handle whatever comes next. I know my mother. She won't make this easy. But everything I've done, this house, the documents, the agreement, it was all to protect you. Because you protected me when I couldn't protect myself. I love you. Always." Caleb, I closed the journal and held it to my chest. He'd known, he'd prepared. And because of him, I wasn't just surviving. I was starting to live again. That night, as the sun set over the hills and the sky turned lavender and gold, I planted the first seeds in the backyard. Marigolds. He always said they reminded him of sunshine. Weeks passed after the court ruled in my favor, but peace remained elusive. The house was mine, legally, physically, emotionally, but it still felt like a war zone. I kept waiting for the next strike, and I didn't have to wait long. One morning, I stepped outside to water the marigolds. The backyard had become my sanctuary, Caleb's garden finally growing. But that day, something else caught my eye. A plain white envelope. No postage, no return address, just slid halfway under the doormat like a snake in hiding. My stomach knotted as I bent to pick it up. I already knew who it was from before I even opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "This house will always be mine." No signature, no threats, just those 6 bold typed words. I stood there in the sunlight, the hose still running, soaking the soil beneath my feet. Then I laughed. Not from humor, but exhaustion. Margaret had nothing left, no legal footing, no family support, no sympathy. And yet here she was, trying to haunt me from across the street like some bitter ghost. I walked back inside, folded the letter neatly, and pressed it into the soil beneath the marigold bed. Let her words rot where new life bloomed. Over the next few days, I spotted her car idling across the street more than once. A silver Lexus, windows barely cracked, engine off. She never approached the house, never got out, just watched. I didn't wave. I didn't panic. I didn't even acknowledge her. I'd won the war, and she knew it. But she was the kind of person who couldn't stand silence, couldn't stand being ignored. Angela helped me file a formal restraining order. It was approved faster than I expected, likely because of her documented stunts. Changing the locks, breaking in, false legal claims. The judge saw the pattern. When the paperwork was finalized, I had it delivered directly to Margaret's address. 2 days later, the car disappeared, and this time it didn't come back. That evening, I lit one of Caleb's favorite candles, the kind that smelled like cedarwood and oranges, and curled up on the couch with one of his old novels. He'd never finished it. There was still a dog-eared page halfway through. As I turned the pages, I realized something strange. For the first time since Caleb died, the grief felt quieter, like it was making room for something else. Healing. The next morning, I cleared out the last untouched drawer in his office. In the very back was a USB drive I didn't recognize. Curious, I plugged it into my laptop. It was full of videos. Most were silly. Caleb recording himself singing off-key in the car, vlogs from weekend hikes, him giving me fake weather reports in the backyard while holding a broom like a microphone. I laughed until I cried. But one video was different. It was labeled, "In case I'm not around." I hesitated, then hit play. Caleb sat on the front porch, wearing the hoodie I used to steal when I was cold. His eyes were tired, but his smile was genuine. Hey babe, if you're watching this, I guess I'm gone. And I hate that. I hate leaving you behind. But I know you. I know you're stronger than anyone gives you credit for, especially my mom. He chuckled, then leaned toward the camera. Listen, if she gives you trouble, which she will, remember this. You are my home. You were always my home. Not the walls, not the mortgage, not even the last name. You. I'm sorry I didn't protect you better from her. But everything I've done, I did to make sure you're okay. Don't let her win. Don't give her one more tear than she deserves. You deserve to breathe, laugh, and grow something beautiful. Promise me you will? He paused, eyes glassy. I love you, Brooke. Always. The screen went black. I sat there, hand over my mouth, unable to speak. The next day I took a pair of shears and trimmed back the dead branches along the backyard fence. Then I built a small sign and staked it into the soil behind the marigolds. It read, Caleb's Garden. Bloom where you are loved. Neighbors started stopping by, offering compliments, asking what I was planting next. One elderly woman from 2 houses down left me a hand-painted flower pot. She said she used to watch me pacing the porch after Caleb passed. You were like a storm cloud with feet, she said. Now you look like sunlight again. I smiled politely, not ready to accept that praise, but maybe she was right. I was starting to feel like myself again. Or maybe someone new. Someone I hadn't met yet. But Margaret wasn't done. Not entirely. One afternoon, I received a call from Caleb's former business partner, James. Hey, Brooke, he said, hesitating. I didn't want to get involved, but your mother-in-law reached out again. My pulse spiked. What did she want? She's been fishing for anything she can use to discredit you. Asked if I remembered Caleb being forgetful during meetings, if I noticed anything, off before he passed. I told her to drop dead. I laughed in disbelief. That was polite of you. She's relentless, James continued. But I thought you should know, she's not gonna win. No one's buying her version of things. She's burned too many bridges. I thanked him, then hung up and stared out the window for a long time. Margaret wasn't just clinging to grief, she was addicted to control. The idea that her son left something behind that didn't belong to her, it was eating her alive. But I was no longer on the menu. I belonged to myself now. And if she tried anything else, I'd be ready. I went to sleep that night with the windows open. The cool breeze carried in the scent of marigolds and rosemary. The ghosts were quieter now. But I wasn't afraid of them anymore. By the end of that week, the garden had fully taken over the backyard. What started as a few flower beds had grown into something bigger. Rows of vegetables, winding paths of wildflowers, even a modest bench Caleb had bought for someday. I painted it turquoise and placed it beneath the old oak tree where we used to drink iced tea in the summer. The space felt alive again. It wasn't just healing me, it was reminding me who I was before grief hollowed me out. I was finally starting to breathe. But peace, I was learning, was a temporary visitor in my life. On a quiet Thursday morning, I opened my front door and found something new. A manila envelope. Unlike the last ones, this one had a return address, Margaret Blake. I almost tossed it straight into the trash, but something made me pause. Curiosity, maybe, or some stubborn need to know what else she could possibly want. Inside were 2 items. 1, a handwritten letter. 2, a faded photo of Caleb, as a toddler, sitting on Margaret's lap in a backyard I didn't recognize. She had circled herself in red ink. On the back she'd scribbled, "He was mine first." The letter read like a monologue from a soap opera. Long-winded, emotional, manipulative. She accused me of turning Caleb against her. Claimed he was confused in his final months. Claimed I had planted that post-nup, forged it even. She said she'd hired a handwriting expert to prove it wasn't his. And then the final line, "If you don't return what rightfully belongs to the Blake family, I will make sure no one remembers your name in his story." It was laughable, if it hadn't been so cruel. I handed the envelope to Angela later that afternoon. "Threats, emotional coercion, and a falsified claim," she said, raising an eyebrow. "She's really throwing everything at the wall, isn't she?" "Will it stick?" Angela shook her head. "Not in a real court, but she's not trying to win anymore. She's trying to exhaust you." And she was. It wasn't just the letters. It was the way Caleb's name now felt like a battlefield. The way every memory I pulled from a drawer or photo album had to be weighed. Was it safe, or would Margaret try to weaponize it? I decided to get out of town for a few days. I packed a small suitcase, loaded the dog into the car, and drove 2 hours north to a cabin Caleb and I used to rent every fall. The owner still remembered me and gave me a discount when I told her I needed a quiet weekend. The first night, I sat by the fireplace, wrapped in a blanket, watching sparks dance across the dark. It was the first time I'd been away from the house since Caleb died. And strangely, I didn't miss it, because the garden may have been blooming, but part of me had started to wilt under the weight of constant defense. I spent the weekend walking wooded trails, journaling, and sleeping in late. I didn't check my email. I didn't bring my phone charger. I just let myself exist. No grief, no anger, no lawyers. Just me. When I got back on Sunday night, the garden was still standing. So was the mailbox. But I noticed the security camera by the porch was blinking red. I checked the footage. At 2:13 a.m. on Saturday, headlights flashed across the driveway. A silver Lexus pulled in. A figure stepped out. Margaret. She walked up to the door and pressed her palm flat against it. She didn't knock. She didn't try to enter. She just stood there for a long, motionless minute, then placed something under the doormat and left. That was the envelope I had found. Angela filed for an emergency extension to the restraining order first thing Monday morning. She's escalating, Angela said. This isn't about the house anymore. Then what's it about? I asked. Angela didn't answer right away. She just looked at me with something like pity. She's angry you're still standing. I looked down at my hands. They didn't feel strong, not lately. But maybe strength didn't always feel like muscles and fire. Maybe sometimes it was quiet, tired, steady. That afternoon, I returned to the garden. I planted a small tree in the corner, an oak, just like the one Caleb loved. A neighbor helped me dig the hole and haul it from the truck. When it was finally in the ground, I stood back and looked at it. It was small now, almost fragile, but it would grow, and that was enough. Later that week, I hosted a small dinner for friends, just 6 people, mostly from Caleb's old job, and my coworker Julia. We ate on the back porch, surrounded by garden lights and the scent of rosemary and thyme. For the first time in months, I laughed until I cried. No one talked about Margaret. No one brought up the court. It was just life, messy and good and ordinary. When they left, Julia pulled me into a long hug. "You're doing okay," she whispered. I nodded. Better than I thought I could. After everyone left, I sat on the porch bench beneath the oak and stared at the stars. Somewhere out there, Margaret was probably watching from a distance, fuming over the fact that I hadn't crumbled. Let her. Because every day I stayed standing was another nail in the coffin of her obsession. She didn't break me. She only proved how unshakable I could be. And the best part? I hadn't even started fighting back. Not really. But soon, I would. Not with anger, not with revenge, but with the truth. And that would be louder than anything she'd ever screamed. Spring came early that year. The garden exploded in color. Lavender along the walkway, bright tulips by the fence, a sea of marigolds near the porch. The oak tree Caleb never got to see planted had grown a full 6 inches since February. It stood like a small sentinel over the yard, quiet and steady. Everything looked so alive, which made it almost surreal when another court summons arrived. Margaret wasn't finished. She was now filing for emotional damages. Her petition claimed that I had knowingly manipulated a grieving family, defrauded them of property, and caused irreparable emotional harm. I read it 3 times, my hands trembling less from fear now and more from a bone-deep exhaustion. "She's not after money," Angela said, scanning the papers in her office later that afternoon. "She's after your peace." "What does she even want?" Angela gave a dry laugh. "She wants you to vanish. And short of that, she wants to be remembered as the victim." I looked down at the pages and realized I didn't feel anger anymore, just disbelief. Grief had wrecked me, but Margaret, she had weaponized hers, twisted it into a crusade against the only person who had loved Caleb enough to let him go. And I was done playing her villain. "I want to countersue," I said calmly. Angela looked up, surprised. "On what grounds?" "For defamation. Harassment, for filing this new suit with no legal standing after she already lost." Angela's eyebrows lifted. "You want to go public?" I nodded. "Not for revenge, for closure." 2 weeks later, we filed. And because the court systems in our town were slow, it didn't take long for word to spread. A local reporter reached out after someone leaked the story. I didn't hide. The article came out the next week titled, "Widow Faces Off Against Mother-in-Law Over Home, Heirlooms, and Legacy." It included quotes from Angela, details from the hearing, and most powerfully, a picture of the garden, now thriving behind the little blue house. The next morning, someone left a bouquet of wildflowers on my porch with a note. "We believe you. Thank you for standing tall." A neighbor within days, similar gestures followed. One woman left a potted basil plant. Another dropped off a bottle of wine and a note that read, "You're not alone. I've had my own Margaret." It turned out the town wasn't short on Margarets, just on people brave enough to name them. When the new hearing began, Margaret didn't show. Her lawyer came instead, claiming she was too emotionally unwell to attend. Angela leaned over during the proceedings and whispered, "She's unraveling." I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just sat, steady as we presented my countersuit, and the judge, an older woman with steel gray hair and a stare like glass, listened carefully. In the end, Margaret's latest case was thrown out. My countersuit was accepted. She was ordered to pay court fees and formally barred from any further contact with me under penalty of law. A permanent restraining order. The fight was over. But the healing wasn't. 1 week later, I stood at the edge of the garden, shovel in hand, staring at the empty patch of earth near the oak. I'd saved it for something special. Something Caleb had once sketched in a notebook full of future dreams. A memory tree. He had wanted to plant one tree for each season, each memory, each moment worth preserving. His handwriting was still etched in the margins of that page. A garden of time, he called it. So I started there. I planted a cherry blossom for the day we met, a dogwood for the cabin we used to escape to each fall, a lemon tree for our honeymoon in California, when we accidentally bought 24 lemons from a roadside vendor and made lemonade for the entire hotel. And I planted one final tree, an olive tree for forgiveness. Not for Margaret, she had made her choices, but for myself. For the days I hated myself for not catching the signs of Caleb's illness sooner. For the nights I blamed myself for not fighting harder, sooner, louder. For the parts of me that still wondered if love should have been enough to shield him. The olive tree stood small and fragile in the soil, but I knew it would grow. They always did, slowly but surely. That evening, I poured a glass of wine and stood by the kitchen window, watching the trees sway in the wind. The house was quiet, not haunted now, just sacred. I'd won. But it didn't feel like victory. It felt like truth. The next morning, I opened my inbox to a single email from Stephanie, Margaret's daughter. Subject, "I'm sorry." The message was short. I didn't know everything. I didn't see it clearly, but I do now. I'm sorry I didn't stop her. If you ever want to talk, I'm here. I stared at the screen for a long time, hit delete. Some wounds didn't need closure. They just needed time. A month later, I hosted a small gathering. Nothing fancy. Just close friends, neighbors, a few folks who had dropped off flowers during the madness. We sat in the garden under string lights, shared stories, passed dishes, and toasted to new beginnings. One man, Caleb's old colleague Jonah, raised his glass and said, "To Claire, for showing us what strength really looks like." I smiled, touched but steady. Because strength wasn't about winning court cases or proving people wrong. It was about showing up, tending to your roots, choosing growth in a world that keeps trying to dig you up. That night, as I stood alone under the oak tree, a breeze swept through the garden, and I thought I heard Caleb's voice, soft, amused, carried by the wind. "You finally did it." "I did," I whispered back, "and this time I meant it.